All right, here we go. I am sorry about the inconvenience, everyone. I have no idea what was happening, but I wanted to make sure that this is live on Podbean and it's actually being recorded. So today we're going to talk about the second part of growing up in psychology. But first, I want to address something that came to my attention today, and it's with regard to teenagers. And so you can reach me on all types of social media platforms. I'm also on TikTok, although I don't do any dancing and stuff like that, which I'll probably be doing once my youngest daughter is old enough to get on TikTok, but that's another story. Uh, but for now, I don't do that. But I do post some things in relation to this podcast and my blog. But it came across my attention today. Someone brought it to my attention, and then I looked it up and saw that some of our teenagers on TikTok have started a hashtag about personality disorders. And I wanted to talk about that with all of you because some of you are parents and some of you are actually going to be parents of teenagers pretty soon. And I want to make sure that I touch upon this. And I also know that there are some teenagers listening. And since I'm getting ready to work with teenagers again, yay me, starting on Monday, I'm trying to stay on top of or abreast of things that are happening on social media. So there's this hashtag going on about personality disorders, and our teenagers are self diagnosing. And I did post about it today publicly on Instagram and also Facebook. Guys, you cannot self diagnose. Okay. Google is not your friend with regard to diagnosing yourself. Okay. Personality disorders are very rare. People throw around layman's terms such as, oh, I have narcissism, or, oh, I have uh, multiple personality disorder, which we don't even call it multiple personality disorder any longer, and some people throw around, oh, I have, schizotypal personality disorder. Those things aren't funny because they're very serious conditions. So I saw today that someone has started a hashtag about borderline personality disorder. So I want you to talk to your kids and let them know that they should not diagnose themselves. Borderline is a very serious condition. We don't even diagnose that in children. And we don't typically diagnose children with personality disorders. Why don't we do that? Because most of the time their personalities are still developing. Makes sense, right? Right. Okay. So this going around on TikTok, self-diagnosing, some of these disorders closely tie into tragedies that we don't want to see happen in children or teenagers. So I want to make sure that if you have a teenager, and I've had one, you have to closely monitor what they're doing on social media. You'll be surprised at how teenagers are heavily influenced by what they read on social media. And peer pressure is a real thing. Most of you know that because you've been teenagers. So we know that peer pressure, is a real issue. So, I've seen different things start, such as, boys getting into negative things, such as, different radical groups for politics. I've seen kids get involved in different radical groups that deal with race, dealing with a lot of hateful type, behaviors toward other people. Watch your boys in particular and make sure they are safe. Help your girls understand, especially the girls, that they do not need to Google disorders and self diagnose. They need to see professionals for that, such as myself. So that was one thing I wanted to talk about. And then I wanted to talk about something else, but I'll wait till we finish up with the blog. So if you have any questions about or you suspect your child has some type of mental illness, and you need to contact the professionals in your area that specialize in those things. And remember, for you teenagers, we don't typically diagnose personality disorders in children or teenagers, okay? So if people are telling you you have borderline and they're lay people and they're not professionals, my suggestion is that you stop believing them and you stop tweeting about it and you cease all of the information gathering from social media and TikTok and also Google. There are professionals out there who can help you sort through things that you are going through. Okay. All righty. Dun, 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 dun. Growing up in psychology, part 2. And there's one more. Part 3 is next week. One of the challenges that I had in psychology is that I had my own biases. So when I talk to you all about how I grew up in psychology, it is to help you understand how I, in this part of my blog, overcame some of my own biases so that I could effectively deal with children, in particular, nebulous children or children who can see ghosts. So a lot of my biases, to help you understand a little bit about me, is because I just didn't know any better. I just didn't know any better. And you have to remember that sometimes when you work with kids, they don't know any better either if no one's ever taught them. For example, one of the things that I always wanted my children to understand is how to deal with all people. That is not something that came natural for me. That is not something that I grew up doing, working and interacting with all kinds of people. And I mean different religions, different races, different cultures, et cetera, et cetera. My background was African American only, and that was my culture and that was my ethnicity. So I grew up in East Cleveland, Ohio, and if you know anything about it, it is dominantly African American. So you take a female such as myself, and you put me into a world that I've never been in. And the first time that happened was when I went to graduate school the first time. So I attended graduate school at an HBCU. If you don't know what that means, it means Historically Black College and University, and at Tennessee State in Nashville. And what happened was I was the only African American in my cohort. And that was, I see one of my friends from childhood. Hi. Thank you for joining me. See, my East Cleveland peeps. I'm talking about y'all. You take a kid from East Cleveland who's African American and you put them in a graduate program, and they are the only African American in a cohort. That's really difficult. So you grow up with all kinds of thoughts. Your parents come from the background of the 1950s and 60s, and we all know what happened to African Americans in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And then they raise children, they're going to be guarded toward their children to protect them from some of the things that they went through. No different than me being protective over my kids now. And so when I entered that type of environment, I immediately not only have biases about the individuals that were in my cohort who were also teaching me how to become a psychologist, but then I felt as if they had biases toward me. And that was really difficult. So if you're not a strong person, the biases that you believe people think about you can get the best of you. So one of the first lessons that I had to learn was to not have biases toward other people and to not assume that they have biases toward me. And let me tell you, that was really, really hard. That was hard. And what made it hard sometimes is that sometimes I was right. Sometimes I was absolutely right about how people perceived me. And I'll tell you, that is a story that I have over and over and over again, even at my age now and with my experience in psychology. It goes a long way. And over the years, I can tell you that there have been numerous individuals who have preconceived notions about me, and it doesn't feel good. So, one of the things that I wanted to learn was how to remove that because I know how it feels. Let me give you an example of how it felt for me. And this is at the doctorate level. And this is why it was so important for me to learn how to get rid of this because it's not helpful to your clients. There were individuals who will say things to me such as, "Oh, you're just so well spoken." And, "Oh my goodness, you just write so well." Really? Because many times I'm sitting in the room and I have the highest degree of anyone in the room. That's not bragging points. It just is what it is. So when there are individuals of other races in my face telling me, "I'm just really surprised you wrote that well." Well, what the heck do you think that they mean? "Oh, little old black you. You just know how to write." Now that sounds like it is an automatic bias, but it is not. That's the reality of how it feels. And so what I was doing was getting pissed off, but would bite my tongue because a lot of times I needed my job. I'll just keep it real. Or I needed my degree. I can't tell you how many times that happened to me in hospitals, universities, and most recently last year on a job. Okay. The difference is now I'm older. So a lot of times I fire back and ask them, "Well, how did you expect me to write? Or how did you expect me to speak? Or how did you expect me to interact with these clients? What did you think I was going to say, write, or do?" And you know what a lot of people will do? They'll just sit there and think and say nothing and just look at me. And I just wait on them to talk. You know why? Because I want to get them verbally now. Because things like that and comments like that are just stupid. And that's just the bottom line. But I was doing, yeah, and sometimes the people would get startled when I fire back. Okay. And so, and they would say they'll correct themselves or they'll say, "Well, well, what? What did you expect? When I walked into the room, you expected what?" And a lot of times is, attitude, the stereotypical attitude problem that is a stereotype for Black women. Surprise, surprise, when people encounter me professionally, I'm a totally different person than the way that I'm even talking to all of you. So I had to learn ethically that I had to remove my biases even with working with my own clients. So let's talk about children that can see ghosts and how this relates to them. My first thought was what a lot of you think, like, this is not real. This can't be happening. And I would go back to the books and try to figure out, speaking of personality disorders and another category, psychotic disorders, I would typically try to figure out from the books, is this a diagnosis? Is this a psychotic disorder? Are they delusional, like a delusional disorder? What is this? And the biases and the negative thoughts that I had about this, for example, dismissing the possibility that these kids can see ghosts, made me discount their thoughts and feelings. It did. And I said, wow, one day I had an aha moment. I think I was in St. Louis, and I said to myself, man, this is exactly how I felt. This is how I feel when I walk into the room and I'm the only African American and the only African American female in a group of 25 people, and I have to speak to all these people. And then, I'm pretty sure that they have biases toward me, except I'm older than these children, so I can handle it now. Well, I shouldn't do that to these kids because it's not fair. So initially, conscious or unconscious biases would get the best of me in working with these kids. And so I wasn't able to work with them as effectively as I wanted to each time they told me that they had different experiences or could see ghosts. So I had a client once when I was training, who I had a couple of clients who had beliefs about what their kids were seeing that went along the line of their country of origin. And so sometimes they would want to go back to their countries and deal with it, like with medicine men, or, their leaders and their indigenous groups or their culture. And I would have like this unconscious bias because I was fresh out of school. Like, okay, yeah, all righty. Well, you're going there. These things aren't going to go away. We need to get, treatment. This is probably a psychotic disorder. And some of them would tell me, no, if they see ghosts, then we could do different rituals to get rid of it. And I was so judgmental when I first started working with these kids and families. It's even embarrassing to tell all of you about it. And so, if I was going to have the healthy relationship with these families, then I had to remove my own negative thoughts in order to treat them. It was necessary for me to do that. And so when that happened, I became more culturally diverse in thinking with regard to the type of children that I served. So it opened me up to different cultural beliefs. It opened me up to different symptoms, because some cultures have different symptoms, or the symptoms match certain cultures. That's something that you students have to learn as well about our population if you're listening. And so when these paranormal experiences started coming to me from children, and they came at random. So if you never heard my story or read it on the blog, I didn't ask for this to happen. They would come to me at random. And so the internal biases that I had going forward when these kids would come to me were removed. And that was in St. Louis. When I lived there, that was removed. And it wasn't instantaneous. It didn't happen overnight. It's not like I had the aha moment and went. One of the thoughts that I had was, how are my colleagues going to believe me if I tell them that I'm working with all these kids that can see ghosts? What are they going to say about me? What are they going to do? I have got to figure out how to talk to my colleagues about this and also change my attitude. And so it took a while. When I did change my attitude, I started to think differently about these kids who could see ghosts, and I started to treat them differently. I didn't mistreat them before. Treatment means I had to learn to treat them based upon what they were telling me. So the door opened up when this happened for me. The door opened up because I started to realize that a lot of these kids had equal symptoms. Remember, all of these kids are or were confidential. And I couldn't talk to them about each other because it's confidential. And so when I would pull these kids off of the list, a lot of times when you look at their backgrounds, they don't talk about seeing ghosts. Nobody mentions it. But when you do what we call a structured clinical interview, when you interview the crap out of your clients and you pull pride, you get all that information out of them so that you can draw a conclusion about what should be done in treatment, then a lot of times that's when I would find out. And I was able to, because I was more open-minded, I was able to match different symptoms. And it was really cool because I started talking to different, my friends who are also psychologists, different social workers, other people that I worked with. And I started saying, hey, I am able to, I had I was very objective in what we were doing with the treatment, because I started to go, wait a minute. All of these kids have the same symptoms. all of them have their parents talk about the same things. And I started to draw conclusions because I started to open my mind and my judgment was no longer skewed for these kids. So if we just pause for a second, and you are a therapist or you are a psychologist, psychiatrist, or a social worker, God bless all of you, because I know it is not an easy field. But if you don't open your mind up to the possibility of thinking outside of the box, then you may not be able to assist them properly. So think about it. When I had my biases and was judging all of these children, I was not able to move beyond the stereotypes that I had. So when I was able to do that, my decision making skills improved heavily. I was able to draw up these, either do psychological testing, or I was able to draw up these beautiful treatment plans that I would go over with my colleagues when we would meet in order to help these kids. Because even if these kids could see ghosts, they still had symptoms of mental illness, which is why they were coming to us or to me in the first place. So, one of the things that you don't want to do is to harm your clients. You have a duty to protect them. So when my thinking improved about this topic, then I was able to better accept them, the fact that they could see ghosts, and interact with them better. And the relationships that I had with them grew a lot stronger. And over time, I started to understand how powerful that is. This was a really pivotal time in my life when I grew up in psychology, because it helped me personally, which also helped me to help the kids. And it was just really powerful. And so what happened was, I'm talking about St. Louis now, while I was in St. Louis, what happened was I started getting almost every kid, and I don't even know how this happened or why I was ordained to do it. But once I worked on myself in order to help these kids, it seemed as if every single kid that I worked with actually could see ghosts. This went on for a long time. So again, when you're in community health, you don't know which clients you're going to get because you pull them off of a waiting list. And typically, and I do this to this day, if I was in community health, I would do the same thing. The kids at the top of the list, go first. And so when I pulled them off of the top of the list, I mean, I can tell you, I'm at child I can go all the way to Z and talk about the different experiences that these kids had and what they said to me about their ability to see ghosts. It continuously happened. And so when I met, for example, child A, there was a time when I was actually still pretty new. The first time I lived in St. Louis, and I can remember originally working with that child, I was pretty guarded. And thought that this child had some type of psychosis or was having some symptoms of some psychotic disorder. And once I developed, and child A is a child that followed me from one place to another, a child who also told me that where this child first saw me, there was a ghost following me into a room. To work with that child A. But I didn't find that out until child A and I worked together at the second company. If you didn't follow that, go back to some of my earlier blogs and read about child A. When I opened up my mind and removed some of my psychologizing, if you will, with these kids, then with child A, we had such a good rapport. Such a good rapport. I mean, it changed my thoughts about what was happening. I'm still using child A, for example. It changed my thoughts about what was happening to child A. It changed the relationship that I had with child A's parents. It changed my relationships going forward with the other children. And actually, it's changed my relationships with how I work. Hey, Tammy, with how I work with the kids now under my care. So it was a really it was a major move for me, and I still remember that, and I still work on it. I just heard something recently, and I wrote about it last week or yesterday and posted it. And I had to chuckle when this child told me something. This is child I, and we have a long way to go before we get to child I, but I'll touch upon it real quick. I had to chuckle because child I told me something about the boogeyman. And I remember back in the day, I would have been like, yep, this is an imaginary friend. This is fake. What is this child abuse? Some of the questions you do still ask, especially about child abuse. But I can recall 20, 25 years ago, I probably would have diagnosed this kid with something probably more severe than he or she needed, because I could not understand that it is okay for these kids to talk about things that bother them that might not bother us or be different, or can be different for us. So we can't judge these kids. And there was a social worker who told me when I talked to her about it many years ago, and she said, and I think I wrote this on the blog, I said, what am I supposed to do? All of these kids keep coming to me saying that they see ghosts. I don't know why these kids keep coming to me, but they keep coming to me and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going on and on and on. She's social worker, so she's listening, because that's what social workers do. They just listen and they pay attention, or they pretend to pay attention. And she said, well, who are we to judge these kids if they say they can see ghosts? And I remember looking at her going and just processing what she said. And it was very memorable, because I told her, you're right. Who are we to judge? Why should I think something is wrong with them just because they tell me that they can see ghosts? And she said, nope. And I've had plenty of kids to tell me, and we worked on the mental health, and I let them go ahead and see the ghosts that they want to see. So I thought, genius, genius, she's right. And so all of that built me into who I am with working with these kids. And so outside of working on a lot of my own implicit thoughts, about these clients, I also had to work on how I believe people perceive me, other professionals, which obviously I'm through that part of me. Otherwise, I would not be talking about nebulous kids or kids who can see ghosts. I coined the term nebulous kids, just in case you don't know. And that's also on the blog. You can read it. So I had to work on that in order to feel comfortable. Let me tell you guys, I have worked with some really hard parents. I paused on that because one parent just came to my mind, and I'll never forget this man, a father. And you know what he said to me? I'm going to let you work with my kid because I've heard about you, and you come recommended highly from some of my colleagues. This was in St. Louis. But he said, just know I don't like you. And it shocked the heck out of me. And I said, oh, yeah? And he said, yeah. And I could tell his wife was getting tense. I said, you don't know me. He said, I don't have to. You're Black. And I said, I don't have to work with you or your child. Convince me that I need to work with you based upon what you said. So it's all in how you handle the situation. And his wife said, I would like you to work with our child. And I said, okay. You're going to deal with me because your wife wants you to. So I went ahead. Now, hey, 20, 25 years ago, I would have told him to kiss my butt and kick rocks. Because listen, if you feel threatened and you're in this field, you don't have an obligation to work with anybody you feel threatened by. Wow is is right. That's exactly what he said to me, right in my face. And when I gave, just to finish that story, when I gave them the results of the testing, he sat with his legs crossed and stared at me like he wanted to kill me. And it was a beautiful thing because I sat and I looked at him the same way and gave his wife the results of the testing and diagnosed their child with the condition. Sure did. And when it was over and we had finished the meeting, we call it feedback, he thanked me. And I walked them to the door and I stared at him and he stared at me and he nodded his head. You know how guys nod their head? And I turned around and walked away. Sometimes, if it's civil like that, you can go ahead and work with those individuals. But I wanted to bless him verbally, but I didn't because my priority was to that mother and that child. That mother said she wanted me to do it, so I said okay. And so those things do happen, those negative perceptions and stereotypes. And honestly, sometimes, psychologists and other professionals, we can do it as well. We can do it as well to each other, and so one of the things that I developed over time is that when a child comes under my care, a lot of times I don't read the history. You know why I don't read the history? Because I don't want to develop any type of preconceived notions about these children. And I will tell them that. I would say, I don't know anything about you. So it's up to you to talk to me and tell me what you want to know. And then I'll fill in the blanks as we continue to establish rapport over time. And I'll write your history up in whatever report that I give to them. So I tell them sometimes I don't know anything about you because if we read those things, and this is just my method, every other psychologist does it their own way. We start to hypothesize what could be wrong. And I don't do that. I like to get to know people for a long time. So, like when I'm in a school, for example, I will go sit in the classrooms, I'll do observations, and I'll go see them in gym, and I'll go play with them on the playground, and then I'll just, you know, um, walk them out the door in the evening. I mean, there are a lot of things I do to interact because I don't believe you could just diagnose kids or just test them without establishing some type of relationship. And that way the kids will tell you more. Remember that as well. And so you want the kids involved. And sometimes, even if they're 5-year-olds, I'll ask them, is it okay to do this? You get their assent, even though you don't have to. I think it makes the kids feel comfortable. So there are a lot of things that I go ahead and I do. That remove some of the biases that you can develop or stereotyping, especially if you work in an environment that's economically challenged, you can easily fall into the trap of stereotyping your parents. And so let's see. It's also another thing that you have to overcome, I think, even if it's religion or your gender, is discrimination. So, like the parent said to me that he didn't want me to work with his kid because I am African American. Well, he said black, which is fine too. He definitely wasn't afraid to say black, so he said it. Um, you know, we also have to be careful about how we say things to our clients. I've had, excuse me, a couple of experiences where nebulous children have told me different stories. And some of them I've written up on my blog about, seeing ghosts. And I've seen other professionals become so offended by what these kids say, and then they verbally lash out at the kids. And I've had to correct, other professionals about that one-on-one because it is not okay to just disregard and verbally lash out toward your clients. These are little kids. Um, and so you can easily inflict a wound, and that's not the therapeutic relationship that you want to have with children. So, I'm trying to see what else I wrote about in that blog. Okay. Let's talk about the whole Doctor of Philosophy degree, because a lot of you have been asking different questions about that. Especially you guys that have babies, you want to know a little bit more about that. One of the first things that I said in this blog is that it's not easy. It was not easy. That I had a little 9-month-old baby when I started my doctorate. The hardest part, other than writing a dissertation, oh my God, nobody tells you writing a dissertation is hard. It is hard. That's the hardest part. The other part for me was having a child and doing residency requirements. And so I used to have to leave, for example, at 4 or 5 from my residency requirements every day, because I had to go, for example, pick my baby up from daycare by 6 o'clock. So it was really hard. And I had a lot of wonderful trainers and supervisors who would understand that I had a baby, and I was always grateful for their understanding. But when my colleagues can work till 6, 7 o'clock, I thought that I had a disadvantage because I had to leave. It's what I had to do. So if you're a mom, you can do it, but I want you to understand that, it's not easy. It can be done. You got to have people helping you, and I have a strong family who helped me get through, and I appreciate them to this day. And the faculty I had believed that I could do it. And so sometimes that little baby would go to school with me, and my advisor, Bob, who I talk about, would have her, or some of my cohorts, she would be in the lab with them, if I had to attend class or, go to a meeting or something like that. If you are a mom and you want to start a PhD, you can do it. You can do it. I did it, and so can you. Let's see. One person I just spoke about is Bob. He was my advisor for my doctorate program. He died just a few years ago. And I would talk to him about nebulous children. So this has been going on for many years for me. And I would go straight to him. I would also go straight to him when I would have challenges with some faculty. One told me that she was failing me on a paper because my experiences were so different. Yep. Let me see. What did you say? I hated the way teachers would discriminate against parents who use cannabis. Oh, good Lord. The parent was always on time to pick up and drop off and attend all IEP meetings. Okay, hold that thought. I'll talk about that in a minute, because I have stories about parents being high, but I also have stories about the parent that I worked with who came to an IEP late because she was prostituting. I have so many stories, so hold that thought for a second. Thank you. So when that faculty said that to me, Bob corrected it. He had to correct another person. I mean, these things for me went on, and I still earned that PhD in 2006. So you can too. You can too. And I love every minute of it. Every child that I've worked with, I've had some difficult kids, I enjoy them as well. So, I thought I love Chicago, but I wound up leaving Chicago, excuse me, about 12 years ago, and recently came back to Illinois. And I didn't think I was supposed to be in Chicago for the rest of my life, which I'm not. And I started working for a university, a big one in Illinois, and they opened up the door to a lot of brand new experiences. So this is a time when I was put directly in line with special education, and I went back to it at this time. And so I've tried to leave special education a couple of times, and I guess God has other plans for me with regard to special education. And so at that time, there was a whole nother lesson that I had to learn. And that was that I did not have to take anybody threatening me. So that was another lesson that I learned, because someone did threaten me when I was about 8 months pregnant. I was about 8 months pregnant. And that one actually had my entire family angry. That's a story I'll continue next week. I want to go back to this person's statement, if I can see it real quick before we signed off. And it's actually a legitimate, statement. I appreciate all of your comments. This one was funny though. I didn't expect to say cannabis or weed. But this person said, again, I hated the way teachers would discriminate against parents who use cannabis. The parent was always on time to pick up and drop off or attend all IEP meetings in school. And we do get sometimes staff. Oh God, it was just a parent who smelled like marijuana in a meeting that I went to, and I didn't smell it because I wear a K95 mask. That thing will cover up everything. So I didn't smell it, but the staff did. But they didn't discriminate or anything. But I know what you mean, because sometimes, and that's why I say, with populations that typically are of lower socioeconomic status, we do have a tendency to stereotype, or the parents aren't going to show up, or get your parents involved. I just told somebody that recently, find a way to get your parents involved. You'd be surprised. Even individuals of low means want to participate in what their kids do in school. So that's just a stereotype, less money, less education, less money, less involvement. If they do things that seem outside of the box to certain staff, such as smoking marijuana, then that automatically means that they use drugs, and they're not going to be on time for meetings, and they're not going to be involved in the kids education. And all of those things are stereotypes, and you see how harmful they can be, if we keep those biases forefront. And so that's why I had to remove mine. You can't work with people that way. And so the more I came to terms with my own biases, the door just opened up, and more kids came to me, and they still do. I recently met a kid that can see ghosts, but unfortunately, guys, I can't talk about that one in detail for a long time, maybe a year or two, but I did allude to it on my blog recently. So read the blog. But you are absolutely correct. That's so inspired. You are such an inspiration, Dr. Lisa. Thank you. I try to be. Thank you. So it's a lot to talk about. So, I will tell you what happened in that situation that I encountered, which totally changed me again. It's funny, because as you get older, you can look back at your past, because that's what I'm doing, and put together a story. If you've been in your field long enough, like I have, and see how God has used you for many, many years and developed you. And so a lot of this was developing me and to be a child psychologist, child and adolescent behaviorist, the way that I was ordained to be. And I did not expect a lot of this stuff. And I didn't expect to go through things that I went through as a female, as a African American female, or working with these kids. But I can see, based upon how I work with these kids now, how I was trained up to do all this. And this is why it is so special to me to tell all of you about it. All of these years that I had to write it down. I was like, I gotta write this down before I get too old and I don't remember any of this stuff. But also, on behalf of these kids, I am showing you through my writings, how I worked with them. And I hope that it helps, some of you. And so that if you work with these kids, then you'll know some of the things that I did. And if you have not experienced a child who can see ghosts, you will. No one believes me when I say that, but somebody sent me a message and said, "Oh my God, Dr. Lisa, I just met a nebulous child." And I said, "No, you didn't." And she said, "Yes, I did. He told me X." And just as you said, some of the techniques that you did to protect it, you said to tell them in front of you to pray some of this stuff away and watch what enters the room when you ask God to protect you with his angels. And she said this kid was like, "Oh my God, the angels entered the room." Kind of like this. If you can see me, oh my God, just looking around. And she was like, "I was texting you like, this is true, this is true." And I said, "I know it's true. I don't have a reason to lie about it." It's exactly what happened to me for many years. So there you go. Question from a parent. Question from a parent, and then I'll let you go. Yep, chills is right. It gives everybody chills. Remember, the kids can see this stuff. The kids can see it. So if you ask them in that moment, "Well, what do you see? What happened?" They will tell you if they trust you. They will tell you. It's happened to me many times. That's why I knew what she was talking about, because the kids would tell me, and even the parents would walk in the room and say, "Whoa, you guys just prayed and asked God to send his angels?" That's why I'm looking around, because that's what the kids would do. And I would go, "Yep, your child felt scared." And I remember one parent walked in and said, "Oh my God." And I was like, "What do you see? What do you see?" Because I don't see ghosts. She's like, "It's God's angels all over the room." So some of you question, question my religion. And I never really say it, but you guys know from the podcast and the blog that I do believe in God. You see why now? Amongst other reasons. I've had so many kids talk to me about this stuff. I mean, I can't help but to believe, right? Because of all these kids. And so that's why I talk about it. And Mom had a question. She wanted to know how to discern between a ghost, what she called like regular ghosts, and a demon. Is there a difference? And I thought that was such a good question. And so I'm going to address it. And I will address it again. But for you, if you're listening, that's a great question. From my experience, I'll tell you, kids have told me that a demon is a demon. And these kids never talk about a purgatory period. They either see dark angels, which they call dark angels to adults, they're demons. And to kids, they look like dark angels. So all the kids would describe these demons as dark angels. Anything that's not of God, and the kids will tell you, not everything that glows white is of God. Demons are manipulative. They'll say dark angels change, so they shift change. They'll change to manipulate you, Dr. Lisa. So you have to be careful, because not all white angels are of God. Okay, so keep that in mind for this mom, that the kids have told me, and the parents that can see ghosts, that they're demons. Okay, so I will talk more to you all next week. Hey, happy belated Christmas to all of you if you celebrate Christmas. Happy holidays if you don't. But also, Happy New Year 2022. Oh my God, guys, I'm going to be 50 in a couple weeks. Whew! We'll be celebrating that on air. That's the golden birthday. So I know some of you can relate. All right, have a good night. Thank you for joining me. I'm signing off, Dr. Lisa.